This last summer, I had the privilege of standing before you and asking if you feel the burn. Since the senator's last visit, we've mobilized incredible numbers in the community and talked to people across the entire region about why it's so important to get involved. And so I'm here asking you one more time, are you feeling the burn? Let me be clear. This movement is the direct result of the hard work and dedication of millions of people across the country, and more specifically, of so many of you talking to your neighbors and being a part of each other's lives. And we are leading. But that doesn't mean that we can relax for a single moment. The wealthiest and most powerful people in the world will stop at nothing to spread disinformation and fear to divide us. All right? The way we keep the pressure up and bring this home to save the planet is by volunteering your time. I know you have donated. I know you have watched the debates. But now I'm asking you to stand alongside us and talk to your neighbors. Because we know exactly what works to get people out to the polls. It isn't TV ads, and it isn't Facebook posts. It's people like us talking to each other about why we're passionate about changing the political environment and why Bernie's the person for the job. So I have to ask you, does it make you feel uncomfortable to knock on strange doors? Because I'm not going to lie, it often makes me feel a little uncomfortable, just as it makes me feel uncomfortable to speak in public. But now more than ever, we have to embrace this. We have to learn how to feel comfortable with our discomfort. And I have to ask you, is it any more uncomfortable than the feeling you get when you wake up and look at the headlines every day? Is it any more uncomfortable when you think about the fires in Australia and what's happening to our climate? So, with only 23 days left until the primary election in New Hampshire here, I'm asking you, join us to make calls and to knock on doors, to help talk to your neighbors. Ask a friend to join you, or let us introduce you to someone to walk with. We have training, hand warmers, and of course snacks to make sure you feel ready to go. In just 2 hours of your life, and we can move mountains together. So this is it. This is it. This is the most important political moment of our lives. And for the rest of our days, we will be able to look back knowing that we not only did everything we could to save the planet, but we came together as the most diverse movement in American history. As a movement to stand up to oligarchy and end fascism in this country. This is not me. This is us. Join us and let's do this. Thank you. And lastly, I want to get a chance to introduce a dear friend, a super volunteer for Bernie, an activist, and along with his wife, Andrea Walsh, the co-director of the World Fellowship Center, Andy Davis. Please give a round of applause.
Hi there. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for your patience. I've been waiting my whole life for this candidate. I think it started when I was 9, and I looked out the window of our kitchen in Yarmouth, Maine, and saw the repo men driving away with our blue family station wagon. The bank had foreclosed and was seizing associated assets of my father's business. That was when I found out that it doesn't matter if you do everything right. If you follow all the rules, you can still end up teetering on the edge of poverty in this system. Years later, I was working in Guatemala and I saw other people who were following all the rules. And the best that they could hope for was a job at starvation wages, stitching shirts in a sweatshop for a U.S. corporation. And the rules there were enforced by death squads. Whether we're in Conway or Guatemala or Immokalee, Florida, where some of my Guatemalan friends go to pick tomatoes, we're part of a global community, and it's super important that we act like it. And Bernie Sanders understands that. Yeah, you can clap. Thanks for filling that moment. As the warrior poet Audre Lorde said, without community, there can be no liberation. I think back to Bernie's first win in a mayoral race in Burlington. Many of you know he won by 10 votes. Think how history would be different if those 10 people hadn't turned out to vote. Think how history would be different if the people who get people to the polls hadn't done their job. I like to think that in the future, our descendants will thank us for supporting this extraordinary candidate in this election. The people's historian Howard Zinn, in his autobiography, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, told us that the future is an endless succession of presents. And if we live today as we think that human beings ought to be able to live, and if we act together, that in itself is a marvelous victory. Bernie Sanders has been bringing people to that sort of a victory for 40 years. So let's get all together this time around and look towards another sort of victory on February 11th and in November. Get on this moving train and pull your friends and relatives up together, and let's do this. Go Bernie.
Please welcome to the stage artist and writer Molly Crabapple.
Thank you so much for being here on this freezing morning. I'm honored to stand in front of you. I'm an artist and a writer, and in my work, I document the extraordinary power of people to overcome oppression when they're united in the cause of justice. I believe we have to be able to see the future that we are fighting for, something I learned from doing my animation on the Green New Deal, A Message from the Future with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm honored to stand before you today as part of the movement to elect Senator Bernie Sanders as the next president of the United States. We have the chance to elect a president who has spent his whole life fighting for the working class. Bernie Sanders is a man who has always told the truth, no matter how lonely and no matter how hard that was. While Chicago schools imposed segregation, Bernie Sanders got himself arrested protesting for students' civil rights. While politicians denied climate change, Bernie Sanders raised the alarm about the destruction of our planet. When pundits told us that we should be grateful for crumbs, Bernie Sanders knew that we deserve better. He brought ideas like Medicare-for-All, tuition-free public college, and the $15 minimum wage into the mainstream. When Bernie Sanders is in the White House, he is going to fight for us. And how do we know that? Because he has always fought for us. Other candidates, they spend their time flattering billionaires and collecting fat $2,800 checks from the same people who crashed our economy in 2008. But Bernie Sanders doesn't need big-ticket fundraisers. He has a movement. He has you. His values have inspired hundreds of thousands of people like everyone here in this room, people all over the country, to call, text, and walk through the freezing New Hampshire snow to knock on doors and talk to their neighbors. Now, we live in a moment of danger and a moment of profound hope, a moment of possibility. Our current president is a reality TV show huckster. Trump stokes vile bigotry while he and his rich friends rob America blind. But you know what beats the politics of hate? The politics of solidarity. Now, Bernie Sanders is not just the best candidate to beat Trump, though he is the best candidate to beat Trump. He is the only person in this race with the guts to take on all those powerful industries that so dominate our lives and so decimate the planet. Only Bernie has the vision to fundamentally transform this country. Now, thanks to you, in 2016, Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire. And with your help, we're going to win in 2020. We're going to win the state, we're going to win the nomination, and we're going to win the White House. Together we will win. You all look so beautiful and so strong. I'm so happy to be here. Now, I'm proud to introduce my dear friend and my inspiration, the author of The Shock Doctrine and On Fire, and one of our most prophetic thinkers, Naomi Klein.
Hi, everybody. I know it's snowy outside, but are you feeling fiery? Are we going to win New Hampshire for Bernie? And then are we going to take that victory and ride it all the way to winning the nomination and then the White House? You're damn right we are. In fact, in 1 year from now, we are going to leap directly from an administration guided by bottomless greed and personal advancement to one guided by love, solidarity, and collective transformation. Let that sink in. In a matter of months, we are going to go from a president who refuses to recognize the reality of climate change who is determined, seemingly, to roll back 60 years of environmental protections, who seems determined to torch the planet with glee. We are going to move from that to a president who on day one is going to introduce a transformational Green New Deal. It is going to get us to 100% renewable energy and 100% renewables for transportation by 2030. It's going to give communities like yours control over that renewable energy. It's not going to be Exxon and Shell. You know, they're going to be in court being held responsible for the crimes against humanity that they are responsible for. You're going to keep the jobs in your communities, the skills in your communities, the profits in your communities from that renewable energy. And it's going to keep your prices down. And eventually it's going to be free because the inputs are free for renewable energy. We're going to do that. And while we do it, we're going to leave no worker behind in this transformation. He's going to introduce Medicare-for-All and free college tuition while he's at it. Yes, this is going to be the most epic case of moral whiplash the world has ever seen. And it is going to inspire people around the world to find their own survival instinct and act like the house is on fire because it is. Now, I want to tell you that I believe that we can perform this miracle. And I want to be honest with you, I did not always believe that. I did not always believe that a man as principled as Bernie Sanders, with his record of fighting against war and greed and for the rights of working people in a healthy and clean environment, could become president of the United States. And it's not that I wasn't political. I've known Bernie for a long time because I've been part of movements for social change and social justice and environmental justice for a long time. And for decades, Bernie was the politician that we could count on. He would speak at our anti-war rallies and he would show up at our climate marches. In fact, I spoke at an event with Bernie in September of 2014. And it was in New York City, and it was parallel to the historic People's Climate March that brought 400,000 people into the streets. At that point, it was the world's largest climate mobilization, 400,000 people. This year, we had 7 to 8 million people participate in climate strikes around the world. We're making progress. But I always remember that night because that was the first time that I heard the rumors that Bernie Sanders was considering a run for the presidency. And people were talking about the fact that he was on his way to Iowa, and there were all kinds of whispers about it. And back then I remember thinking, good for Bernie. He'll get out there, he'll raise the issues that really matter, and then we'll call it a day. And I've thought a lot about why so many of us were thinking like that. Why our expectations were so low. And I think the answer is that our expectations were low because our expectations have been systematically lowered for a very long time. Since the 1980s, in fact. And you know, for those of us under 50 in this crowd, that basically means our entire life. You know, we grew up in the age of that famous Margaret Thatcher phrase, there is no alternative, right? We grew up in the age when a guy named Francis Fukuyama declared that we had reached the end of history. Imagine that. They call us arrogant. History is over. Stop thinking, no more ideas, call it a day, it's finished. There is one way to run things. It's, this bleak free market vision that we're going to spread around the world, and there's nothing you can do to change it. We almost never saw our beliefs and values reflected on the talk shows, on television, or in the opinion columns in newspapers. We did hear our positions dismissed as marginal, as inconsequential, part of some band of nostalgics who didn't get the memo that it was time to bow down to Bill Gates and the other billionaire overlords who really had all of our best interests at heart. Don't get me wrong, we put up some good fights. We won some battles against bad trade deals, won a few battles against factory closures, not enough. We tried to stop illegal wars, we failed. We tried to fight the cuts to healthcare and education, and for the most part, we failed those too. But in 20 years of activism and social movements in this country, I don't recall a single time when someone told me that they thought an actual progressive candidate rooted in social movements who had taken those hard principled votes on wars and bailouts and military fundings and social security could actually be president of the United States. And what I remember is that we hoped our protest candidates would poll high enough to make it into the debates. That's what I remember. And then came the 2016 New Hampshire primary. And I really want to pause for all of you to think about how important that event was. It changed everything. You changed everything. You rocked the world and changed history. And we are still changing it. We are still in the story that we began writing 4 years ago. Because you know what we realized that day? We realized, all of us, that we had been lied to. We realized there were so many more of us than we had been told. When we were at home cursing our televisions, thinking that we were the only ones who felt this way, millions of other people were in their homes doing the exact same thing. When Bernie won New Hampshire, we realized that the kind of policies that save lives, livelihoods, and safeguard a habitable planet aren't just right and just. They are some of the most popular policies in this country. And when people hear about those policies from a candidate they trust because he has proved himself over and over and over again as worthy of that trust, they say, hell yeah, that sounds good to me. And thanks to this campaign's amazing and path-breaking digital organizing, millions upon millions of us found each other online, and the rallies and meetups and barnstorms got bigger and bigger and bigger. This is the story that began here. As you all know, people in and around this campaign like to dig up old videos of Bernie that show him saying things that are truly prophetic. And it shows how long he has been part of these movements for peace and justice. And some people think that when we watch these old videos and when we share them, that we're gloating or trying to score points against rivals who have, let's say, less flattering videos out there. But I don't think that's what those videos are really about for this movement. Because the truth is, there is no joy in being right about climate change or disastrous wars or entirely foreseeable economic meltdowns. There's actually a lot of sorrow. In fact, think for a moment what our world would look like if Bernie Sanders had been listened to over these past decades, if he had been believed. Think of the richness of our natural world that we could have preserved if we had listened to him and so many scientists about climate change back in the 1980s, the species we could have saved from extinctions, the glaciers and coral reefs that would still be intact today. Think of the military coups and illegal wars that could have been prevented. Think of the millions of lives that were wasted. Or if he had been listened to about the dangers of corporate free trade deals like NAFTA, not just the jobs, but the entire communities that could have been protected. Think of what daily life could look for if we actually had Medicare-for-All over these past few decades, and Bernie told us it was possible. Think if we had listened to him when he warned not to create the Department of Homeland Security and with it ICE. Think of the communities that could have been saved from that terrorizing force. I want to tell you something. There is no joy in being right, But there is something else that I want to talk about in it. There is a profound responsibility in it, because now our entire planet hangs in the balance. Because if Bernie was right about what we should have been doing over the past 30 years, then it's time that we believe him about what we can do over the next 30 years. Believe in it in our bones. Believe in it deeply enough to talk to our friends and neighbors and family members who are still afraid to believe it because they don't want to have their hearts broken. Speak to each other with kindness. I think so much of what we're experiencing in this moment is people being afraid to let themselves believe that this is possible. But you know what? Screw being right. This time, we win. Yesterday, John Cusack described Bernie Sanders as the man with future in his eyes. Our so-called experts, have often written Bernie off as a man from the past, so that phrase really stuck with me. It turns out that they were wrong about that, as they have been wrong about pretty much everything else, from wars to bank bailouts. It turns out Bernie is a man of the future. He was just waiting for the world to catch up to him. He was waiting for us, all of us, the power of us. He was waiting for us to find each other across all of these divisions of generation, of religion, of race, of gender, of ethnicity, waiting for us to find each other in common cause, in common struggle. The power of us so long suppressed under that blanket of lies. That's what this campaign is about, liberating the power of all of us. And none of it would be possible without the amazing people of this state, of New Hampshire. You started something incredible. This time we are going to finish it. None of it would be possible without the man it is my joy and my honor to introduce, the senator from Vermont and the next president of the United States, Bernie Sanders.
Power to the people. 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 Power to the people.
Thank you. Let me thank Naomi Klein for the introduction. I hope everybody knows that Naomi is one of the great political writers in the United States of America. And she has been way ahead of the curve in talking about the existential threat of climate change. So I just want to thank Naomi not only for being here, but for all of the work she has done for so many years. And I want to thank Molly Crabapple for being a great American artist, and we thank Molly. And I want to thank Andy Davis and Jeffrey Ide as well for their remarks. And I want to thank the Tuckerman Brewing Company. Now, I want to clear the air. There's a rumor going around that we bribed you all with a pint of Tuckerman's. Not true. Don't want the media to get a misperception of that. That's not accurate. But we thank Tuckerman's for allowing us to use their facility. As we enter the last weeks of the primary here in New Hampshire and in Iowa as well, I want to thank all of our volunteers. If you ask me why I think we are going to win here in New Hampshire, and with your help, I believe we will win here in New Hampshire. It's not because of our TV ads and our radio ads and all that stuff. That's important. It is because of the kind of grassroots activism that we have here in this state, in Iowa, and all across this country. It moves me immensely to know that in very cold, snowy weather, both in Iowa and here, we have people knocking on doors, we have people making phone calls, people doing everything they possibly can. This is a grassroots movement, and I just want to thank all of the volunteers here in New Hampshire for everything that they are doing. Now, as all of you know, one of the messages of our campaign is us, not me. And that means that real change never takes place from the top on down, but only when millions of people stand up and fight for justice, which is all about the man we honor tomorrow, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But ironically, and I would not have known this, needless to say, a few months ago, if there was ever a time when this campaign is about us, not me, it's right now, because as all of you know, I have my constitutional responsibility as a U.S. Senator to be at the impeachment trial of Trump. Well, you're applauding, but I would rather have been in New Hampshire and Iowa. You know, and you know, we have planned our schedule to, you know, do many, many events all over this state, all over Iowa. We're going to South Carolina just right after we leave here. So that all has been interrupted. So more than ever, this campaign is about us, not me, because you guys are going to have to carry us over the finish line. And I know you will. So thank you. You know, we are revamping our schedule as we speak. And, you know, I'm going to be back in New Hampshire as much as I humanly can, and in Iowa as well. But obviously, the impeachment trial has thrown a wrench in some of our previous plans. So we're more dependent upon you than ever. The reason I think we are the strongest campaign, a lot of folks talk about electability, and that's an important issue, because all of us and millions of Americans understand that it is absolutely imperative that we defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of our country. And Trump will be defeated. He will be defeated because the American people, regardless of their political views, understand that in America we cannot have a pathological liar in the White House. That we cannot have a president who is running one of the most corrupt administrations in American history continue in the White House. That we cannot have a president who is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot. A president who quite intentionally, in an unprecedented way, is trying to divide us up rather than bring us together as Americans. And I believe that of all of the candidates out there, we are the strongest campaign to defeat Trump. And I'll tell you why, you know, and that is because to defeat Trump, in terms of practical politics, we are going to need a huge voter turnout. The largest voter turnout by far in American history, because do not underestimate Trump as a candidate. And I think that our campaign is the campaign of energy, of excitement, the campaign that can bring out that turnout of working people who are disillusioned with the political process and of young people who historically have not been involved in elections to the degree that they should. So I think that our campaign is not only the campaign of energy and excitement and will bring out a large voter turnout, it does that because we are talking about the issues that are relevant to the lives of working families all across this country. We are the campaign that says loudly and proudly that this campaign is of the working families, by the working families, and for the working families of this country. That we are prepared to take on the greed and the corruption of the corporate elite, whether it is Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, or the prison-industrial complex. And we are the campaign that says that in the midst of unprecedented income and wealth inequality, where 3 people now own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, where the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, where 49% of all new income is going to the top 1%, our campaign says very clearly that the wealthiest people and the largest corporations in this country will start paying their fair share of taxes. This is a campaign which is prepared to ask the very hard questions, uncomfortable questions. And that is, for a start, we call ourselves a democracy. We're proud that we're one of the longest-standing democracies in the world. But to what degree is democracy being undermined when billionaires are able to buy elections? To what degree is democracy being undermined when we have Republican governors all over this country engaging in voter suppression, engaging in extreme gerrymandering? So our view is, and we come from New England and we have that tradition, democracy means one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. And that is why, instead of having one of the lowest voter turnout rates of any major country on earth, we want America to have one of the highest voter turnout rates. And that means in America, we're going to move to public funding of elections. We're going to overturn Citizens United. We're going to end voter suppression. And under our administration, if you are 18 years of age and a citizen, you vote. You have the right to vote. End of discussion. And I think we're going to win this election because millions of people understand that we have a rigged economy. This is the richest country in the history of the world. Half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. I grew up in a rent-controlled apartment. I know a little bit about that. And what that means in New Hampshire, in Vermont, all over America, you get sick. People are worried about whether they can afford to go to the doctor, whether their kids can afford to go to the doctor. People are struggling right now with huge student debt. Just talked to a woman a few hours ago. Her daughter has a $200,000 student debt, can't get her feet on the ground economically. In the richest country in the history of the world tonight, over 500,000 Americans will be homeless, including 30,000 veterans. In New Hampshire, Iowa, all over America, I have talked to workers who are making $10, $11 an hour trying to raise kids on that abysmal starvation salary. It cannot be done. So what we are saying is that the time is now to end all of this austerity for working families and put a little bit of austerity on the billionaire class. What does that mean? What does it mean? It's not complicated. We all know what it means. It means if you work 40 hours a week in New Hampshire, Vermont, or America, you don't live in poverty. We're going to raise that minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. It means that women should not make 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. Equal pay for equal work. Not a radical idea. It means that we're going to make it easier for workers to join unions and engage in collective bargaining. It means that we're going to create millions of good-paying union jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, our roads and our bridges and our water systems. And it also means that when we talk about infrastructure, we recognize that affordable housing is a major crisis in America. And when we talk about an agenda for working families, we have got to talk about education and rethinking education in America. Every psychologist who studies the issue tells us that 0 through 4 are the most important years of intellectual and emotional development. No one disproves that. And yet we have a child care system in America which is clearly inadequate and dysfunctional. In Vermont, and I know in New Hampshire, very hard for working class families to find quality, affordable child care. We're going to change that. Together, we are going to implement universal, affordable, high-quality child care. It's the same thing for education in general. I met with some educators here in New Hampshire a couple of months ago, and they told me something which was hard to believe. They said, if you are a young person graduating college and you want to be a teacher in New Hampshire, there are some school districts where you will start off with a salary of less than $29,000 a year. I mean, how absurd is that? If we understand the importance of education for the individuals and for the country as a whole, in a competitive global economy, we need the best educated workforce. We need the best and the brightest young people to go into teaching proudly, but they have got to earn decent compensation, which is why I believe no teacher in America should make less than $60,000 a year. That is not, again, a radical idea. Who denies that education is enormously important for the future of our country? If it is important, you want great people to go into education, and you got to reward those people fairly. Not a radical idea. And when you talk about education, it is not a radical idea to say that every kid in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in America, regardless of his or her income, has the right to a higher education. Which is why we are going to make public colleges and universities tuition free, which is why we are going to cancel all student debt in America. You know, people say, hey, Bernie, that's a radical idea. You want to cancel all student debts over $1 trillion, a lot of money. You know, radical idea. I'll tell you what's radical. What's radical is that 11 years ago, Congress, against my vote, bailed out the crooks on Wall Street whose illegal behavior nearly destroyed this economy. That bailout was radical. You want to hear what's radical? 2 years ago, Trump and his friends gave over $1 trillion in tax breaks to large corporations and the 1%. That's radical. Demanding that we have a modest tax on Wall Street speculation to make public colleges and universities tuition free and cancel student debt. That is not a radical idea. That is exactly what the American people want. I'll tell you something else that is not a radical idea. And I raised this concept of what's radical and what's not, and thank the people of New Hampshire. enormously for moving this country in a direction in which the needs of working people are beginning to be addressed. 4 years ago, I came here and I said, you know what? I believe that health care is a human right, not a privilege. And the whole establishment, the political establishment and the economic establishment and the media establishment is, oh boy, how radical can you be? Imagine that the wealthiest country on earth, the United States, does what every other major country on earth does what our neighbors up in Canada have been doing for decades. How radical can you be? So let me say a word about healthcare, because this is something that I have passionately believed in. Maybe it's because of my background, but it's something I have passionately believed in my entire life. And that means that regardless of your income, whether you are poor, whether you're working class, whether you're middle class, whether you're wealthy, you have a right to go to any doctor you want, any time you want. And what it means that if you end up, God forbid, in a hospital with a serious procedure, you have a right to come out of that hospital and not see your family in financial distress. I don't think that is so radical. All right? I think that's what the American people believe and where we have got to go. So let me say a word about the current cruel and dysfunctional healthcare system. And I want to spend a minute on it because the healthcare industry and others are going to be misstating and providing a lot of misinformation about what I believe. Number one, please understand that right now in America, we are spending about twice as much per person on healthcare as do the people of any other nation. We're spending about $11,000 for every man, woman, and child. You got that? $11,000 a year for every man, woman, and child in this country. It's about twice what they spend in Canada and most European countries. Now, you might think that if we're spending so much more than any other country, my God, we have the gold plate. We have the system that the entire world is envious of. All of us have quality health care. We have the lowest cost prescription drugs in the world. My God, we're spending a fortune, but look at what we're getting. Well, let me tell you what you're getting for spending twice as much per capita. You're getting 87 million Americans uninsured or underinsured. You're getting 30,000 people dying every single year because they don't get to a doctor on time. You are getting, and this is amazing to me, you are getting 500,000 Americans every year who are going bankrupt because of medically related bills. Now, can you imagine, I want you to think about this, the cruelty of a system in which we spend so much money. You want to blow your money on a casino and you go bankrupt, that's your business. You want to make a risky business venture, it fails, your choice. You get cancer and you run up a huge bill, you should not go bankrupt. All right? And that is what is happening all across this country. Last year, when so many of our people are uninsured or underinsured, the healthcare industry, the drug companies, and the insurance companies made $100 billion in profit. The pharmaceutical industry is charging us for the medicine we need, in some cases, 10 times more than they charge Canadians or Europeans or Asians for the same exact product. So let me be very clear in stating that, in my view, the function of a rational and humane healthcare system is to provide quality care for all in a cost-effective way, not to make billions in profits for the drug companies and the insurance companies. So this is what Medicare for All is. I want you to hear from me, who wrote the damn bill, as they say, rather than what the insurance companies will tell you, because it's not really complicated. First of all, Medicare today is a strong program, but it needs improvements. What we do with Medicare is we expand it to cover dental care. Last I heard, dental care was oral health was part of health care. Hearing aids and eyeglasses, and also home health care will be covered under Medicare for All. So we have a healthcare system which covers all healthcare needs. I know that this state has been hit so hard with the opioid epidemic. Of course, under Medicare for All, we will cover all forms of addiction as a health issue, by the way, not a criminal issue. And of course, we know that we have a mental health crisis throughout America. And of course, Medicare for All will cover mental health and make sure that we get the counselors and the psychiatrists and the psychologists where they are needed. Okay, so that's what we cover. We believe if you're going to have a healthcare system, cover all healthcare needs. Not a radical idea. All right, how do we bring it about? What we do is right now, to be eligible for Medicare, you got to be 65. First year, we lower the eligibility age to 55. Next year to 45, next year to 35. Fourth year, everybody is in. It is the simplest, least disruptive way to provide health care to all. Now, how do you pay for it? Well, let me answer it in two ways. First of all, we got to ask how we pay for it today. And if we went around the room, and I do this, I can't do it today, and asked you what kind of premiums you're paying, some of you would tell me you're paying $800 a month. Some of you would say you're paying $1,000. I talked to a woman in New Hampshire who's paying $1,700 a month. That's how we're paying for it. We're paying for it because when you walk into a doctor's office, you may pay a $50 copayment, all right? $100 copayment. You are paying for it with out-of-pocket expenses. You are paying for it through huge deductibles of $5,000, $10,000, so your insurance doesn't kick in until you spend a whole lot of money out of your own pocket. You are paying for it with outrageous costs of prescription drugs. What Medicare for All does, we eliminate all premiums for workers and their employers. Gone. We eliminate all co-payments. Gone. We eliminate all deductibles. Gone. We eliminate all out-of-pocket expenses. Gone. And because we're going to take on the greed and corruption of the drug companies, nobody in America on the Medicare for All will have to pay more than $200 a year for prescription drugs. Okay, now you're saying to yourself, that sounds pretty good. All right? Am I here to tell you that all of that is free? Of course not. Healthcare is an expensive proposition. It has to be paid for. We pay for it in a variety of ways. But what is most relevant to working families is this. We have a proposal which says that people will pay 4% of their income, exempting the first $29,000. $29,000 or less, it's free. All right? 4%, exempting the first $29,000. Now, the average family in America makes about $60,000 a year. That means they will be having a 4% tax on $31,000, which is $1,200 a year for comprehensive health care. I think it's a pretty good deal. And I should tell you that that family today, that $60,000 a year family, is now on average paying $12,000 a year, and their employer is paying $14,000 a year. Now, how do we save so much money? Well, two fundamental ways. Number one, we end the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies. That's $100 billion a year. Number two, even more important, the system that we have now allows for thousands of separate insurance plans. You have a $3,000 deductible, you got a $5,000, you got a $10,000. You're in this network, you're in that network. You can get this prescription drugs, you get that prescription drugs, on and on. To administer a system as complicated that is, everybody here has had to deal and fight with the insurance companies, right? To make sure that they paid you what you thought you were entitled to. You're paying the other guy at the other end of the phone to tell you that you're not covered. That's true. So we have an administrative nightmare. It's not only for consumers, it is for doctors and nurses. You'd have a burnout. Talk to doctors. They will tell you we are sick and tired of arguing with the insurance company what we can prescribe or what we can't. And it's really having a negative impact on the medical profession. So our system is very simple. Everybody is in. You get a card. You go to any doctor you want. You go to any hospital you want. You don't have to take out your wallet or your credit card. It is paid through public taxation in a progressive way. And that is how we can provide these benefits in a much less expensive way. Now, let me say a word about something that Naomi, where's Naomi? Is Naomi still here? She's in the back there. All right, that Naomi Klein has been working on. And it is an issue of such consequence that it simply cannot be ignored. And I know sometimes people get frightened and nervous, about issues that are so consequential. But it has to be laid out on the table. And that is the issue of climate change. And let me just say this. It is an embarrassment to me, and I think the American people, that we have a president of the United States who rejects science. All right? I don't know how you can be a president who rejects science. Number two, what the scientists are now telling us, and this is where the scary stuff comes in, is that they have underestimated the degree and severity and speed in which climate change is ravaging our country and the entire planet. What they are telling us and what we are seeing with our own eyes is the polar ice caps are melting at a faster rate than they had anticipated. The oceans are warming at a faster rate, which means that sea levels are rising. And that means that if, as they estimated, this, by the end of the century, temperature on Earth goes up by about 7 degrees Fahrenheit, it will mean that in America, major cities like Miami, New Orleans, Charleston, New York City, and many others will be partially or completely underwater. It means that countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, parts of China will be underwater. It means that the extreme weather disturbances that we have seen in recent years, a couple of months ago, Venice, Italy, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, underwater. Houston, Texas, underwater. We are going to see more extreme weather disturbances, more and fiercer storms. We're going to see more drought. That means that farmers in the Midwest and elsewhere around the world will have shorter growing season, unable to produce the food that we need. Drought leads to fires. You all are seeing with your own eyes what is the future of this planet, not to scare you. Unless we get our act together, you're seeing it in Australia right now. You are seeing a beautiful country, a continent, burning up as we speak. And you saw the horrors that people in California had to experience. I was in Paradise, California a number of months ago. You all remember Paradise, California? That is where they had this terrible, terrible wildfire. 86 people killed. Virtually, hundreds and hundreds of buildings destroyed. What they are telling us, we will see more wildfires of more severity if we don't get our act together. What we are looking at is climate refugees by the millions. If people around the world cannot get clean water, cannot find land to grow their crops, they're going to migrate. And when they migrate by the millions, you cause severe international tensions. We're looking at the spread of disease. Bacteria thrive. Some bacteria thrive on warm weather. We're going to see diseases that will expand beyond where they historically have been. Now, I have introduced, in response to all of this, I have introduced the most sweeping climate change proposal ever introduced by a candidate for federal office. Now, I have been criticized because people say, Bernie, you want to spend a whole lot of money in terms of this Green New Deal outline. And I say, yes, I do. And I want all of you to think, what is the alternative when we are fighting for the future of this planet? How much is too much? And what the Green New Deal will do, by the way, is create up to 20 million good-paying jobs as we transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. It means that we are prepared to tell the fossil fuel industry to stop the lies and to tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of our planet. So this is, and lastly on this issue, what makes it even more complicated is this is not just an American issue. If we did the right thing tomorrow, it still would not solve the problem. This has to be an international response. And as president, what my job would be is to rally people all over the world. And I know this is not easy, but rally people in China, in Russia, in India, Pakistan, Brazil, all over the world to stand up and demand that we tackle climate change. And my vision here, and again, this is a radical vision, I can't promise you that we can implement it, is to maybe in this moment of crisis, to tell people all over the world that instead of spending 1.8 trillion a year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool our resources against our common enemy, which is climate change. Okay, thank you. All right, and I don't want to be, overly rhetorical here. This is very difficult stuff. Imagine bringing China and Russia and India and Pakistan, all these countries, bringing them together to understand that this is an issue that the whole world is involved in. Not easy, but I think we have a moral responsibility. I don't know. I've got, 4 great kids and 7 beautiful grandchildren, including 3 here in New Hampshire. And I think that we have a moral responsibility to make sure that the planet we leave these kids and future generations is healthy and habitable. And that is what we've got to do. Now, when we talk about moving this country toward justice, we must talk about a racist and broken criminal justice system. We must ask why it is that in America we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, 4 times our size, and people in jail who are disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American. So let me very briefly talk about the proposal that we will implement in the White House, and that is, number 1, getting to the root causes of problems. We will invest in our young people in jobs and education, making sure that kids in school do not fall through the cracks, that when we get out of school, they are prepared to get decent jobs or pursue a higher education. So we'll invest in jobs and education, not more jails and incarceration. We will end private prisons and detention centers. We will end the so-called war on drugs and legalize marijuana in every state in America. And we will expunge the records of those arrested for possession of marijuana. And when we talk about broken systems, we're also talking about a very broken and racist immigration system. So let me just tell you this. Number one, on my first day as president, we will repeal all of Trump's racist immigration executive orders. On our first day in office, we will once again provide legal protection for the 1.8 million young people and their parents eligible for the DACA program. We will radically reform our border policies under our administration. Children will not be yanked from the arms of their mothers. And we will do what the American people in a bipartisan approach want us to do. And that is, despite Trump's demonization of the undocumented, the American people believe, and I do, in the need for comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. One of the more horrific aspects of modern life in America is witnessing the terrible tragedies that we are experiencing in terms of gun violence. And I know that anytime we turn on the TV and we hear of another horrible shooting someplace in the country, our stomachs turn and we say, when will it end? When will it end? And all I can say about this issue is, first, our gun safety proposals will be determined by the American people, not the NRA. And that is the most important point to be made. Because the American people have come together. I'm not going to say that there's unanimity in thought, but gun owners, non-gun owners, people in rural states like New Hampshire and Vermont, people in urban areas like Chicago or Los Angeles, are beginning to come together around a sensible gun safety approach. And that means universal background checks. Violent people with a history of violence should not be owning guns. It means ending the so-called gun show loophole. It means ending the so-called straw man provision, which allows people to legally buy guns and then sell them to criminal elements. And it also means something that I have believed for a number of years. It means that we have got to end the sale and distribution of assault weapons in America. You know, as a United States Senator, I am often on the floor of the Senate listening to my colleagues speak, which is not always an enjoyable experience. Like me, they have a tendency to go on and on and on, you know. And many of these conservative Republicans who get up and speak, their mantra is that they believe in small government. They believe in getting the government off the backs of the American people. And what I say to those so-called conservatives is, if you believe in getting the government off the backs of the American people, please recognize that it is women who must control their own bodies, not politicians and the government. And my promise to you is that I will never nominate anybody to the Supreme Court or to the federal bench who is not 100% pro Roe v. Wade. Now, I've gone on too long already, but let me just conclude by saying this, and I think I'm the only candidate for president who will tell you this. No president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. And the truth is, the corporate media doesn't talk about this very often, but the truth is that the power structure of America, and by that I mean Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, fossil fuel industry, military industrial complex, prison industrial complex, the 1%, they're enormously powerful. I'm a U.S. Senator. I deal with these guys every day. They have endless amounts of money. Endless. No, ordinary people don't know what endless means. Everybody has a budget. They have endless. They can spend as much as they want, whatever it takes, they can spend. The only way, and I say this one day before Dr. King's birthday, and I know that if he were here, he would agree, that the only way that real change has ever taken place in America, I want you all to think about it. Real change, what are we talking about? We're talking about the right of workers to engage in collective bargaining by forming unions. That's real change. That took place because workers went out on picket lines, workers were beaten, workers were jailed, workers were killed, in order to make it clear that working people are human beings, not beasts of burden. That's how we created unions in America. If you look at the history of the women's movement, the kids don't know this, but 100 years ago today, women in America did not have the right to vote. Women could not, in many cases, get a higher education. Women could not fulfill their dreams in doing the work they wanted to do. Society and the establishment defined for women what their role in society was about. But women stood up with their male allies and said, sorry, you will not define who I am. But that took the effort of millions of people. We look at the civil rights movement. And again, Dr. King's birthday is tomorrow. It wasn't just Dr. King giving the beautiful speeches that he gave. It was millions of people, African Americans and their allies, who stood up and said that racism is unacceptable in America. We are going to do everything that we can to end racism. Millions of people. Talk about... And you just talk about, I want you all to think about real change. 30 years ago, which is no time at all from an historical perspective, if we were in this room and somebody jumped up and said, you know, Bernie, I think that in, 20 years or so, gay people will have the right to get married in every state in this country, everybody else in the room would have said, you're crazy. That is never going to happen. And yet, and this dog agrees with me. He's here. And yet, because of the willingness of the gay community and their straight allies to stand up and say, you know what, in America, people should have the right to love whoever they want, regardless of their gender. They stood up, they fought back, and we have made enormous progress. So my point is, when we are taking on the extraordinary power of the corporate elite, the only way that change takes place, that we provide workers with decent wages, that we build affordable housing, that healthcare is a right, that education is a right, that we tackle climate change and immigration reform and criminal justice reform and women's rights and more. The only way that happens is when millions of people stand up and are prepared to fight for justice. And in many ways, that is what this campaign is about. It is a justice campaign, nothing more than that. Economic justice, racial justice, social justice, environmental justice. So tonight I am here to ask for your help. That's the beer, I guess. All right. In two ways. Number one, need your help to win the primary here in New Hampshire and to defeat Donald Trump. But number two, we need your help the day after the inauguration. I'll be back. All right? I'll be back. We need your help to transform this country. No president can do it alone. But when millions of us stand up and fight for justice, nothing can stop us. Thank you all very much. Okay. Thank you.